what we've seen and what we always have seen throughout history is that when people go through tragic times, they all respond differently. And so in each circumstance of Jesus' appearance, we can see how each disciple that Jesus has appeared to has responded differently to the tragedy that they went through. The very first time we saw that Mary went through this tragic time, and it caused her to actually seek after Jesus. And so in the first sermon, we saw that response. Sometimes people go through tough times in life, and those tough times, rather than drive them away, drive them closer to Jesus. The next time we saw on the road to Emmaus, two disciples that were walking the other way from Jesus. Sometimes trials and tragedies cause us to walk away from Jesus. And then we looked at one of the disciples who got stuck. He didn't know what to do or what to believe, and he was stuck in doubt. That was last Sunday, Thomas the believer, who was stuck in doubt, right? Because he wasn't really Thomas the doubter. That was a bad name given to him for 2,000 years. Today, I want to talk about sometimes we go through trials and tribulations, and we as Christians, because every one of these people were followers of Jesus, we don't always respond the way we wish we would respond when we go through those trials and tribulations. Right? Well, a couple of you shook your head. I don't know about you, but me, sometimes my buttons get pushed at the wrong time and I lose my salvation. I am definitely not a Calvinist. I can lose my salvation in seconds, it seems like. I just drive to Coeur d'Alene and you can watch. God's still working on me. It's a process. If I need tried, go over the hill, it'll work. Every now and then, we get 6 cars. I got to sit at a stop sign in Kellogg, and even then, I'm like, rush hour in Kellogg. So we don't always respond well. That's a minor thing. But when we're really going through trials and tribulations, the truth is we do not always respond the way we would have wanted to respond. The way we would have at one time believed we would respond. We may have been firm and acted all strong and said a lot of things, and then when we go through these and we're tested and tried, we don't always act like we should. Sometimes we feel like we blow it. And it's not that you don't believe. You still believe. But how do you move forward? Because it puts you in a place where at times you just don't feel like you're worthy any longer. So it's not that you are not seeking out Jesus. You're probably not seeking him out like you should because you don't feel worthy. You're still there. It's not that you're walking away. And it's not that you're stuck in doubt. It's a totally different response. Like you just don't feel adequate or worthy in where you're at. And you're going through the motions, but your heart isn't there. And it's not because of Jesus. It's because of the way you see yourself, because of the way you responded when you went through those trials and tribulations. That's what we're going to examine, if you've ever been there, this morning, as we see the second to last appearance that we'll be discussing in this series, Worthy of Assurance. If you have your Bibles, you can turn Luke chapter 5, verses 1 through 11. I'll really be preaching out of John chapter 21, the whole chapter, so you can have your finger in both places. But we're going to start in Luke chapter 5, verses 1 through 11. The scriptures say this out of the New King James Version this morning. So it was, as the multitude pressed about him, that him, of course, is Jesus, to hear the word of God, that he stood by the lake of Gennesaret. Now, what is that? I don't know. I just said it really fast so you would think I knew what I was saying. What it really is in English is the Sea of Galilee. And so sometimes you'll see that sea actually mentioned with 3 different names. It's the Sea of Galilee. And I can tell you, I swam in that sea. And when we were there in Israel, I wanted to swim in it just because there were so many stories in the Bible of it. And though at times when we were traveling on the bus doing our tours, we were told not to get in the water, but I was going to guarantee I got in the water every place there was water in Israel. So I've been in the Jordan, I've been in Galilee, I've been in the Mediterranean Sea. And in Galilee, it was a beautiful place. Not that that has much to do, but I would just say, picture this area. There's rocks around there. There's a beautiful church, and there probably was not a church where these guys were when we read this, but there's boats out there that look just like the boats in the days of Jesus. We rode on our church family and Pastor Todd's in Meridian. We rode on this boat together. We sang songs and worship. Just a glorious time. And I say all that because I am trying to make my sermon longer, I guess, which we don't need to. Just know the Sea of Galilee is a very beautiful place. It's vibrant and it's alive. An awesome place. So they're at the Sea of Galilee. They see two boats standing in the lake. But the fishermen had gone from them and they were washing their nets. Just want you to stop real quick and realize there was two boats still sitting in the lake, but the guys that were fishing in the boats all night long were no longer in the boats. They were out of the boats, away from the boats, because they were washing their nets, probably getting ready to go home for the night, right? So understand, I'm trying to give you context to where we're going. Here's Jesus attempting to teach God's word, right? There's so many people around him that want to hear him speak that the Bible says they're actually pressing in on him. Can you even imagine what that would have been like? You're trying to say something and you're being pressed in on by all sides. But then there's a few fishermen that they're off to the side of what's going on. They're not in the action. They're not paying attention. They're not the ones pressing in. They're off to the side because they've been out all night fishing. They're trying to clean their nets, put away things properly, and then probably go home and get some sleep. So I picture them potentially being uninterested in what's going on. Not necessarily out of disrespect, because I know that at this point in the timeline of Jesus' ministry that Jesus has already introduced himself to these fishermen. They're not quite yet following after him, though he's told them that they will be following after him. So they're aware of who he is. But right now, they're in the middle of shutting things down. And more than likely, I would think they're extremely tired. Verse 3 says this, "Then Jesus got into one of the boats, which was Simon's." You guys see where I'm going with this? "And he asked Simon to put him out a little from the land. And he sat down and taught the multitudes from the boat. When he had stopped speaking, he said to Simon, 'Launch out into the deep and let down your nets for a catch.' But Simon answered and said to him, 'Master, we've toiled all night and caught nothing.'" Now, I could be wrong, but probably after a long night of fishing and then getting ready to go home and sleep, then you're interrupted by Jesus, who decides to step in your boat when he's with all of the masses to preach to the crowd. So then you got to sit there in your boat while he's preaching to the crowd, and you've been up all night long and you haven't done very well in your fishing either. On top of it, you're ready to get some rest, and now you're going to sit and listen to this guy preach from your boat when you were washing your nets and getting ready to leave. I don't know. And then he says, "You know what, I'm done preaching now. Why don't you go out a little bit further and throw your nets out?" I don't know about you, but I think it'd be like, you mean the nets that we just cleaned? Like, I'm exhausted. I'm just trying to get in you what is in Peter's head, mentally and physically, when Jesus asked him to do this. He'd be like, really? Okay. He's not going to disrespect Jesus. I mean, out of respect, he's aware of who Jesus is. Out of respect, because so many other people at this time respect Jesus as a great teacher. Out of respect, because even Andrew would come to Peter and say, "I think this could be the Messiah. Like, potentially this is the Messiah. So what are you going to do when the Messiah asks you, the potential Messiah, to put your boat out, even though you're completely exhausted, tired, been skunked for the night, aren't making any money for your business?" And then you're going to listen to him speak. He's like, "Go out a little bit further." "Yeah, okay. With the nets I just cleaned." "All right." So what happens? It says, "Nevertheless, at your word, Jesus, I will let down the net." Verse 6, "And when they had done this, they caught a great number of fish, and their net was breaking. So they signaled to their partners in the other boat to come and help them, and they came and they filled both of the boats so that they began to sink, pressed down, shaken together, and flowing over. When Simon Peter saw it, he fell down at Jesus' knees, saying, "Depart from me, for I am a sinful man, O Lord." I don't know if Peter in this moment necessarily had the revelation that Thomas the doubter did last Sunday when he said, "My Lord and my God," but he had some sort of revelation flash in his heart in that moment. But I think with what was going on inside of Peter's heart and head after a long fishless night, no sleep, no fish means no money if that's your business, which it was. Interrupted for the sake of someone else, potentially inconvenienced and delayed for the masses who you have no part of, and now asked to do something that you think that you are a professional at, and it's proved to be fruitless all night long. When Peter saw all the fish, I would imagine there was probably some sort of guilt going on inside of him. That when he pulled up those nets, he was like, "Lord, I'm not worthy. Depart from me. Like, I don't deserve this. You don't understand." There was a respect here, but my heart wasn't there. Like, I'm not worthy of you being here right now. I don't know. Have you guys ever been in that place in life before? To some extent, it's not that you've done anything wrong, but you totally all of a sudden are like convicted. Lord, I'm not worthy. To a smaller extent, to try and put it in the modern day term, I may have told this over the years, but when I was at Dave Smith Motors selling cars, it was probably a great similarity biblically as I was growing in my faith to what it would be to fish, because really you're fishing for people to buy cars. And God, I'm not a great salesman, believe it or not, and so God would bless me despite myself. And I had been promoted to sit by the front door. I didn't want to sit by the front door. I liked sitting in the back because I didn't like to have to deal with the people and try and sell them on a car and then face the pressure. Like, you feel pressure? I felt pressure as the salesman. And so I didn't like sitting in the front. And there would be times where people would walk in. Mind you, my wife and I at that time, I had gotten out of college. We had the twins. She was graduated from NIC. She was working for an attorney in Coeur d'Alene, making $5 an hour driving back and forth as a legal secretary. I was working in Chilco, Idaho, from Montgomery Gulch, driving back and forth for minimum wage also. And so I quit my job to work at Dave Smith's because I was hoping to be able to provide enough income that she could stay home with our twins, because that was our desire. So I'm at Dave Smith's and just barely making enough most of the time. God would bless us enough that she was able to quit her job. And so now I'm promoted to the front door, and that doesn't mean that I was making a lot of money, but I remember many, many a times where people would walk in the front door and they'd be like, "Can you show us a car out on the lot?" And I'd be like, "Yeah, I can show you a car out on the lot." Reach down, grab my plate, walk outside with them, and be kind of ho-hum about it. Wasn't a great personality. I'm not here to be all vibrant. Let's go look at this car. Probably just kicking tires. You know what? I don't think that they're going to buy anything. That's just my mentality because I'm not like some of these other guys. And so we go out there and we look at this car, and when we get all done, I'm thinking, okay, see you guys later. I'm about to get in trouble because I didn't bring them in and have them talk to my manager because that was a requirement back then. And so I'll just go in and face the wrath because I always sit at the front door and they see every time that a customer comes in and I have to come back in by myself, and then I just get chewed out. But it's okay. I could just go back to Chilco if I get fired. So I have this real negative concept going on in my mind at the time, and then this happened more than once. Be like, "I think we'll buy it. Let's go." And I'd be like, all of a sudden woken up out of shock. I sold a car. And that happened to me time after time. And I'll tell you that in that time I was growing in my faith, that God was constantly correcting me and constantly blessing me. And there were many a times where I was just like, God, forgive me. I'm not worthy of this. I don't know where these blessings, I don't know how I got promoted. I don't know how I go anywhere in this business because I'm definitely not worthy of this. And yet God would show himself to be faithful. And that's exactly what he was doing in Peter and the disciples' life in this very moment. In verse 9 it says, for he and all who were with him, every one of them, were astonished at the catch of fish which they had taken. And so also were James and John, the sons of Zebedee, and who were partners with Simon. And Jesus said to Simon, do not be afraid. From now on you will catch men. So when they had brought their boats to the land, they forsook all and followed him. The beginning of ministry. This right here was the beginning of ministry for 4 of Jesus's most well-known disciples. After this experience, it says they forsook their business, meaning they left their fishing gear, their nets, and their boat behind them, and they started a 3.5-year journey with Jesus. They would follow Jesus faithfully, as most of you well know, seeing his passion for truth as he would boldly confront religious leaders and teach and preach like no one had ever heard before. They would be eyewitnesses to his compassion for people as he broke social barriers to minister to women, to Samaritans, to the poor, to the diseased, to the dead, and even to his enemies. Jesus was leading a revolution like had never been experienced before. And these guys were along for the ride. And what a ride it was. It was so good that it caused them sometimes to be full of pride, to consider themselves a part of something so grand, connected to the man himself, that they would argue over who was best, who was the most important, who deserved to be seated at the right hand of Jesus. It was all sunshine and roses until it wasn't. Jesus would be arrested. His faithful followers would scatter. They would witness his crucifixion and then his death on the cross, or his torture and then his death on the cross. And for them, it was lights out. Party's over. The end. All of this that we've experienced. Mentally anguished, heartbroken, and spirits are crushed. They're left to deal with the trauma of what could have been. Anybody ever been there before? It's not just the trauma of loss, but it's the trauma of what could have been. What could have been. To their shock and awe, 3 days lost but not forgotten. Jesus appears to 1, and then to 2, and then he finds them all together as the disciples in the upper room. Do you know that in the midst of that there were some angels that appeared to the women that told the women, go tell the disciples. This is the words of the Lord. Go tell them. Go to Galilee. That was the instructions given from the very first moment of all of these appearances. Where did Jesus find them that night? In Jerusalem, in the upper room. We know all of these appearances that I've preached on for the last 3 weeks. 8 days later, he comes back for Thomas. But where are they still? Jerusalem. Back together in the upper room. They're supposed to be in Galilee. And so we're near the end of John's Gospel, chapter 21. Or chapter 20, right, last week? I want to read how this ends. John chapter 20, verses 30 to 31, he gets done talking about Thomas, and then it says, and truly Jesus did many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not written in this book. So many things that they're not written in the book. But these were written that you may believe. The purpose of why John wrote all of this is that we would believe that Jesus is the Christ, that he is the Messiah, that he is the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name, right? a lot of theologians believe that this was the end of John's gospel. He ended with the restoration of Thomas the doubter. But then there was this next chapter that was added after the fact because of the way that it was ended. And if you read it and you understand that, you will completely see this. I think that John realized after writing all of that there may have still been some questions that needed to be answered, right? The disciples have been restored. Jesus visited them. He's assured them. He's commissioned them to go out and share the good news. He even came back for Thomas the doubter. But what we don't know is from the very beginning that they were told to Galilee. Did they ever even get to Galilee? Whatever happened to that one guy? And so I feel like John, when I read through this, and this is just Corey's thinking, he's like, oh wait. As a good pastor, I got one more story to tell you. And so he begins chapter 21. And he says, after these things, what are these things? These appearances, these reminders, these commissionings, this time of assurance. Jesus showed himself again. Everybody say again. Again to the disciples at the Sea of Tiberias. Where were we just at? We're at Genna something, right? Guess what Tiberias is? The Sea of Galilee. What happened? They finally made it to Galilee. Now, you don't know this in the beginning of the instructions, but you'll know this at the final appearance, that when they were told to go to Galilee, they weren't just told to go to this place and meet me in that region somewhere. Jesus gave them specific details. He told them, I want you to meet me at the mountain in Galilee. That's where they were supposed to be going. Now, they made it to Galilee, but were they at the mountain? No, just the opposite. They were at the water. And so they're finally in Galilee. And it says, and in this way, he showed himself again. Verse 2, Simon Peter, Thomas called the twin, Nathanael of Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, that's James and John, two of the other disciples who were together. And Simon Peter said to them, you know what? I'm going fishing. But wait, Peter, weren't we supposed to go to the mountain? I'm going fishing. And so what'd they say? You know what? We'll go fishing with you also. And so they went out and immediately got into the boat. And that night, they caught nothing. Now, there's literally in these next few verses 5 sermons. I'm only going to preach 3 of them to you today. That's my greatest struggle. So I know that we've probably heard this story a lot of different times. We've heard different versions of this story. And so sometimes preachers got to be careful not to make this into a fishing story. Meaning make it out to be a little bit more than what it is. Because we're given facts, but we are so easy to expand upon the facts that we're given at times. Here's what we know from other scriptures. The disciples were supposed to meet Jesus at a mountain in Galilee. They're in Galilee, and they're fishing in Galilee. Here's what we don't know. Why they went fishing. There's nothing that says why they decided to go fishing. Now, of course, over the last week, I've read several different views on this. A lot of pastors take the route of the disciples, specifically Peter being disobedient, and instead of going to the mountain or, doing what he's called to do, that he goes back to his old ways, and that's why he goes fishing. And so you can make some assumptions based on some scriptures. There's other pastors and theologians that I have seen that have said, no, we don't know why they went fishing and why add anything to it. The truth is that Peter was a fisherman, and while they were waiting for Jesus, we don't know how long they had to wait for Jesus, so quite possibly out of boredom, they went fishing just to waste time, because isn't that what fishing is, right? Don't lie. You guys all go fishing. It's just to burn time. That's really the heart of fishing, isn't it? I'm just going to sit here and enjoy some time. And so that's why they might have went fishing. Quite potentially, it's possible that they would go fishing just because, you know what, the way their ministry was supported up to the day of the crucifixion was that other people supported the ministry, but not necessarily their ministry. It was the ministry of Jesus. And now that Jesus has been crucified, it's possible that the coffers, being that Judas gave them away anyways, are empty and they need some money. And they think, well, how are we ever going to go about ministry? Jesus is here and there and he tells us this is what we got to do, but we don't have any money to do it. So how are we going to support ourselves? What are we going to do? I know that this is God's will for our lives. What am I going to do? We got to find a way to get money, because you got to have money in order to do the things that he's asked us to do. And so what are you going to do? You're going to go back to what you've always known to do. And that's exactly what they did. Maybe it wasn't out of disobedience. Maybe it was thoughtful obedience that was really disobedience. Does that make sense? Good. All right. So it's possible that they were going to get money. However, I want to say that all of those possibilities are there only to say we can make some sort of assumptions. Whether it was out of innocence, ignorance, or rebellion, when it comes to their choice, it was dangerous. Over the years, I've witnessed God change the lives of many people. Sometimes that change is in their attitude. Sometimes that change is actually miraculous in their relationships. Sometimes it's in their finances or even their location or their employment. A lot of times the change is in people's habits, the way they live their life. And every time that change took place, I want to say that there was a transformation that took place inside of them because they surrendered to Jesus. However, even with a life changed by Jesus, I have seen people go back. Now, not necessarily, again, going back out of rebellion. Hear me. That's why we need to understand. We don't know the facts of the story, but they don't matter. It's dangerous. I have seen people go back with good intentions, back to whatever it was that had originally been changed. Again, maybe it was out of innocence, maybe it was ignorance, but even just for the moment, a temporary thing took place. I'm just going to visit this again, and what was old can quickly become what is comfortable. Let me just pause on that for a minute. You know that God changed something inside of you. You know that ever since that transformation took place in your life, that he's had you moving in a new direction. For whatever reason, it does not matter, is the point. It doesn't matter the reason. You decide to go back to the old way of doing things. And maybe I'm just going to temporarily do this until I figure out where to go next. Or I'm just temporarily going here because I feel like God's leading me somewhere else. Or I'm temporarily going here just because I'm now stronger than what this once did to me in my life. And just that temporary visit becomes comfortable in your life. It might be an attitude. It might be a location. It might be ministry or employment or sin. No matter what it is. I've told the story many a times of one of my main struggles being transformed is a large part of my family has been alcoholics, and so it's always been, it was the direction I was probably headed in college, of course, as most college students are. And when I came and started dating Stacy, or we were together, we had kids, not just started dating. I'm mixing up the story for the sake of time. We had kids, we were living together, we were getting married. I knew that probably drinking isn't the route that I should go. I didn't necessarily believe in Jesus, but I would start listening to the radio on the way to Chilco. So there was a reason why God would have me drive all the way to Chilco, Idaho for $5 an hour for 8 months, my first 8 months out of college, right? To bring a transformation in my life. And then as I began to grow in the Lord, one of the first things that he dealt with me with was drinking, because I couldn't drink without getting drunk. And I'd tried many a times to just even go to the bar and have one. That never worked. I would try and go and just have a Pepsi, and that never worked. And so, I had to work on this thing going on in my life. And then I eventually went to church with Stacy just out of convenience. Maybe we should check this out. I've been listening to this thing on the radio. We started going back to church. God started growing me. I was growing in my faith. I surrendered my heart to Jesus. I even had come to the church and become a deacon in the church like my first year in here, which was like ungodly because I didn't deserve it. I wasn't worthy of being a leader in that time. I was still fairly young in my faith and growing, and yet that's where I was positioned. And so I was at a place one time with a bunch of other people, and my wife was even there, and a friend of mine. We were at this big dinner, and he said, why don't we have a drink together? And for a quick moment, I thought, you know what? I probably shouldn't. I shouldn't do it because of my position in the church, but I shouldn't do it because of who I am, my struggles. But I said yes. And one isn't going to hurt me, right? So I drank one, and I became comfortable in the moment because in my mind, God had grown me enough that I had a little more knowledge, that I had a stronger faith, that I was growing and things were good in my life, and I was doing well at work, and, I'd been promoted to a deacon in the church, and, all of these things that were going on. I was probably strong enough to be able to step back. Wasn't necessarily sin for me to just have one drink. I just thought I would step back into something that God had been changing inside of me for just a moment. And guess what that moment turned into? Hell the next morning. When you don't feel very good physically, mentally, spiritually, I'm killing myself. Why? If anybody knew what you just did from the church, how stupid can you be? And of the wrath of a wife. Because she had such hope in a man that she would look up to become the spiritual leader of the home, and had seen that growth. Just for a moment, I stepped back into comfort. I've seen it happen when I've had people leave the church, great friends of ours that moved to another city. They were going there with purpose, but then they got comfortable in going back. They got comfortable. It wasn't sin. They just stepped back into what was comfortable. They thought it would advance them financially and help them relationally with some of their relatives. And you know what ends up happening? It destroys them. Destroys their marriage, their jobs. It literally ruined them because they stepped back into something that God had called them to move forward from. It shattered them physically, mentally, and spiritually. Spiritually. Listen, these guys have went back into what is comfortable. That's what makes it dangerous. I don't know why they went back to fishing, but it doesn't even matter. Just the fact that they stepped back into what was comfortable is enough that, they hadn't lost Jesus. But I believe that it's easy for us when we step back into what is comfortable to lose our purpose. We lose our mission. It's dangerous. And a dangerous situation will often turn into a fruitless situation. And a fruitless situation doesn't necessarily mean that it's a fishless situation, but in this case, it was. I've seen people step away and they are financially overwhelmed, but spiritually, they're in drought, dried up, right? In this case, they didn't catch anything. That's what it says. That night, they caught nothing. So how does Jesus get them back on track again? Verse 4, But when the morning had come, Jesus stood on the shore, yet the disciples did not know that it was Jesus. Remember that. They don't know that it's Jesus. Jesus said to them, "Children, have you any food?" Now, understand, Jesus doesn't ask a question that he doesn't know the answer to. In the Greek, this is actually negative. And so the real question that he would have asked is, "You guys haven't caught anything, have you?" That's what he says to them. And they answered him and said, "No." I don't know about you, but if you're in the profession and some stranger comes along and says, "Yeah, you're not doing very good, are you?" How you respond to that? I'd be like, "How do you know? Like, who are you to say anything to me," right? And they answered him and said, "No." And he says to them, "Cast the net on the right side of the boat, and you will find some." I have no idea why they listened to a stranger. Remember, they don't know it's Jesus yet. Now, I could go off on how the sheep will know his voice, and we do see that begin to take place here because they can't see him. I don't know if it's foggy. His appearance is still hidden from them. They're not quite sure. They're not able to recognize him. But for some odd reason, they're obedient to what the stranger tells them to do. Remember, they're pretty much done for the night. They've caught nothing. So, what do? They listen. They cast the net onto the right side of the boat. Now they're not able to draw it in because of the multitude of fish. As soon as the miracle happens, there's a revelation. Therefore, the disciple whom Jesus loved, we know that is the title for John, the writer of the gospel. And he says to Peter, "It is the Lord." Now, when Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he put on his outer garment, for he had removed it, and plunged into the sea. If you're John and the rest of them, you'd be thinking, "What is this dude doing? We have so many fish in this net. We've got to drag this thing in." And Peter jumps in the boat, swims 100 yards, and abandons us to do all the work ourselves, right? That's exactly what he did. That's how excited. I don't care what everybody else thinks. Forget the fish. Jesus is here. And so he jumps in. But the other disciples, they came in the little boat, for they were not far from the land, about 200 cubits, that's 100 yards, dragging the net with fish. Then as soon as they had come to land, they saw a fire of coals there, and fish laid on it, and bread. Jesus said to them, "Bring some of the fish which you have just caught." Simon Peter went up, and he dragged the net to land, full of large fish, 153. And although there were so many, the net was not broken. I just want to point out another point of place of speculation in this story. There's a lot of speculation from St. Augustine, one of the early church fathers, to today. Pastors and preachers have tried to come up with the meaning of the number of fish that have been caught. And so I've heard several theories of them. The numbers all added up together, what the numbers represent, how they correlate to Hebrew letters, that sort of thing. A lot of theories, none of them gospel, but there are good thoughts that come out of it. However, I finally come to what I think it means. When it comes to the fact that there's a specified number of fish that were caught, 153, it means that they caught 153 fish. I can get all super spiritual and holy on you guys and make you think something else, but to me, really, the true value in the number that's there is in how it represents the validity of John's gospel. It's not just some generalized story that's being told. No, he remembers the details of the size of the fish, their large fish, the number of the fish, and how the net even held up this time. That shouldn't seem odd to us that they would know that, right? Do you know anybody that's a real fisherman? And when they come home, do they not know how many fish they caught? Do they not know the size of the fish? Guarantee, most guys that have fishing stories, they could tell you a story right now of a time they went fishing 20 years ago, and they came back with 25 fish, and half of them were hidden from Fish and Game, Ryan, and they were in coolers off to the side and stuffed behind their seat, and they had one that was this big. Right? It's not strange that the fishermen would know the details of the story. But what it should do for us is allow us to see that this is a real story. This isn't some made-up story that, if you were going to exaggerate, why not say 500 fish? Why not say more than the last time when it sunk 2 boats practically? If you're going to make something up that's post-resurrection, like Jonah and the whale jumped in the boat. If I was going to be some grand mythology teacher or something like that to try and get you to think that Jesus is this mythical God that's greater than Zeus, which he's not mythical, but he is greater than Zeus, then I could have come up with some bigger fisher story than 153 large fish. What I do see is that this is a true story. Man, he knew the details of this story. That should say something to us. This is real life. So Jesus says to them, come and eat breakfast, right? Yet none of the disciples dared to ask him, who are you, knowing that it was the Lord. Jesus then came and took the bread and gave it to him, and likewise the fish. This is now the 3rd time that Jesus showed himself to his disciples after he was raised from the dead. Say the 3rd time. Jesus brings assurance. He has to step in once again. Instructions were given from the very beginning on where he wanted them to be, but once again, he's got to bring assurance to them. And that's exactly what he's doing. So how does he bring assurance to the disciples? This time, I'm just going to give you 4 quick points right here. Number 1, he makes the assurance relational. His previous appearances, they didn't describe necessarily exactly what took place when he appeared to them. Like we know that he stepped in, he said peace, he said, touch my sides. We don't know if he was there 1 minute to do all that or a half an hour to do that. If you look at Luke, he even ate some food in front of them, but it doesn't necessarily say that he ate with them. I don't know, but if your leader, the guy that you looked up to, just popped in and out, but decided this time, you know what, I'm going to stay, and I'm going to serve you guys. We're going to spend some time together. I've had to assure you a couple of times, but maybe what we need is some bro time. And so Jesus hangs out with the guys, and he cooks them fish, and he makes it relational, and he's wanting them to understand, don't go back, that you still have a purpose. In fact, that purpose that you have is greater than when I was here. I want you to notice something that sometimes we may not see when we read through the story, is that Jesus is cooking them breakfast, and he says to bring me some of the fish that you guys just caught. And so I don't know about you, but when I'm quickly reading through that, I think that, whatever he's cooking, maybe he's got some eggs on the stove and, something else going on, and then they bring him the fish and he cooks everything up. But it says that Jesus already had fish cooking. He didn't need their fish. Jesus doesn't need what they had to bring, but he still required it of them. Let's do this thing together. What we're about to do, you're not on your own doing. If you were on your own, you'd be fishless, fruitless. You go back to your old ways, it's not going to produce what I need you to produce. You were looking for provision. I'm wanting to show you something completely different. Just bring what you have and put it together with what I've brought. And let's sit down and do this thing together. Sounds like a good potluck meal to me. Let's sit down. Everybody bring something. Let's do this journey together. The second thing is, to me, I saw a reminder of communion as it says that Jesus took the bread. He didn't just say, here's some bread that I cooked on the barbecuer. It's crisp, y'all come grab a piece. But it says that Jesus took the bread and he gave it to them. To me, there would be this idea of what communion is. It's relational also, but it's Jesus providing this bread to them, this nourishment. This is relational. This is his provision. And then the third aspect of this is, I think it would be a reminder of the fishes and the loaves, right? Like Jesus just multiplied things for them. He had a couple fish already, but he tells them, you know what, throw your net on the other side, and miraculously, it's full of large fish, 153 fish. And so what do they eat? They eat fish and bread this morning. I don't know what that would have reminded you of, but I think it would have reminded me that God is miraculous, that he can do the impossible, and that he is my provider. And even when it looked like I might not have the provision to do ministry, and so I'm going to go back to my old way, I'm going to go back to what's comfortable, I'm going to try and raise some money to do it myself, ourselves. God says, no, you don't have to do this by yourself. I'm not calling you to do something without my provision being involved in it. I will still be your provider. I'm the same God that I was yesterday, today, and forever. I will still be there. And then lastly, I believe it was a reminder of their beginnings, right? We know in the very first story I read to you guys who was involved in that story. James and John, the sons of Zebedee, were there. You have Peter and Andrew. And I believe that Andrew may have been one of the unnamed disciples, possibly. All four of them are sitting around fishing in a boat, and Jesus comes and does this again. To them, they're like, whoa, this is the Lord. This is Jesus. Peter jumps in there. John, the rest of them that are a little more responsible, they fish, they get the boats and get the fish to shore so that at least there's something there. They're still doing a little bit of work in getting involved in this. And they're all probably sitting around the fire eating breakfast. And I imagine that for the few disciples that weren't there the first time in the very beginning, that they're all sharing the story. You would not believe this is exactly what Jesus did when he called us into ministry. And they're probably telling this story to each other. And what is that? That's a reminder of the beginnings of their relationship with Jesus, the beginnings of their ministry with Jesus. It's a reminder of those first feelings, those first moments, those first times of joy, those first moments of growth. Jesus is taking them back to their first love. He's reminding them of the why you ever got into this. Because when you start going through the trials and the tribulations and the hurt and the drought and all of the struggles in life, you start to ask yourself of the why. And the why will kill you, destroy you, make you dry, and burn you out. And Jesus is like, listen, you still aren't where. You made a little progress, but you're still not exactly where I wanted you to be. Here's the deal. It's about relationship with me. I'll still be your provider. Remember the why. Remember those first moments of when you first got involved in ministry, of when you first got involved with me. And it seems to me at this point that the disciples are starting to settle in and get focused again. But then there's this next story. This is sermon number 2. I'll try and whip through this. Jesus, sometimes I've thought of Jesus doing this off to the side with Peter, but I believe that these guys are talking and he turns to Peter, who's probably sitting next to him, and he begins this discussion with Peter alone. Like he's come for all of the disciples, but you have to understand he needs to have a personal, one-on-one conversation with Peter. You see, Peter's kind of the leader of the group, whether he wants to be or not, whether he likes it or not. When Peter says, I'm going fishing, and they could have all said, but hey, we're supposed to go to the mountain. We're all going to go to the mountain. Forget you. What'd they do? They all went along with Peter. So when you look at Peter's life throughout this whole thing and where he's at right now, I believe that Peter's definitely the leader, but his heart is still not in the right place. Listen, he's going through the motions, but his heart is still not there. It seems to me he's kind of had this up and down relationship with Jesus, right? Not because of Jesus, but because of Peter. If you go back to the very beginning of Peter following after Jesus, when he filled the boats with fish, his first response was to depart with me because I'm a sinner. I'm not worthy. And that feeling of I'm not worthy, I believe, is what haunts Peter throughout all of his ministry. We think that Peter's biggest issues were that he had an anger problem. He was overconfident or, extra bold, or there was, he would like to do things on his own. I think that his words from the very beginning are what followed after him throughout all of his life. I'm not worthy. This would be his battle. He has the faith to attempt to walk on water. I don't know how you are, but out of all of the disciples, he's the only one that steps out of the boat. And when he starts to sink, right? None of the other disciples had the faith to do this. Jesus reaches out his hand and then rebukes him for his lack of faith. I don't know about you, but that might put some thoughts into my head. Nobody else did this thing, but I step out, and now I'm getting rebuked for it. Peter gets praised for the revelation of who the Messiah is, of who Jesus is. But then just moments later, he gets rebuked for his understanding of the Messiah's mission. That's really what took place right there. You're not going to die. I'll save you, Jesus. That's not going to happen. He misses the point of the mission. Peter cuts off a man's ear to protect Jesus. What does Jesus do? Put away your sword, picks up the ear, and heals the man. I don't know about you, but I'd be thinking, I'm trying to save you. I know I swung for his head and missed and chopped off his ear. Nevertheless, it was with good intention, and you heal the guy. You can imagine the feelings that Peter was probably going through. Nothing kind of ended up like he thought it would end up. And near the end of Jesus' ministry, right before the crucifixion, Peter makes some bold statements that we attribute to like this man of great faith. He says, you know what? I will never deny Jesus. And yet he denies him 3 times. He says, I will die if I have to. But what does he do? He runs for fear of death. Peter says, even if the rest of the disciples fall away, I will never fall away. And yet Peter falls away. Jesus, depart from me, because I'm not worthy. I think his confidence and his boldness was a cover for his lack of worth in life. He struggled with feeling like he was worthy. So not only was what happened to Jesus tragic and a hopeless situation, but then it challenged the faith of every disciple. Can you imagine after all that Peter had boldly proclaimed, how Peter felt when he saw his Savior die on that cross? For 3 days. This isn't gospel, this is Corey. A lot of good, intentional words that were empty and led to broken promises, I think would be going through your head. You know what? He's dead. He died on the cross. I said that I would fight, that I would go to the death too. All these guys have run away, and I'm no different. I ran away too. I can only imagine that on top of the fact that he's struggling with the trauma of what took place, that he's struggling with the trauma of what could have been. What if I would have stood up? What if I would have fought for Jesus? What if I would have done the things that I said that I would do? I can imagine the guilt that he's going through right now of not feeling like he's good enough. Struggling with the fact that he's not worthy. And then listen to this. In John 21:14, it says that this is the 3rd time. Everybody say the 3rd time. You remember when it said that. Jesus has appeared to his disciples since the resurrection 3 times, right? Appearing to them as a group, as a whole. So listen, there was the first time when Jesus appeared to the disciples. And he even says, you know what? And this is all of the disciples are there but one. You guys remember that story? And he tells all of the disciples, see me and handle me. You can see the wounds. You can handle the wounds. Do whatever you want. You can see who I am. And then in that meeting that he had with them, that he breathed the Holy Spirit into them, that he commissioned them. Peter was a part of that first time appearance. He was a part of being able to see him, being able to handle him. He was a part of having the Holy Spirit breathed into him. He was a part of the commissioning of going out and continuing what Jesus had started. He was a part of that first time. And then it was the second time when Jesus appeared again, and he spoke peace to the room once again, and then he gives Thomas the opportunity that he gave everybody else. Peter was a part of that, not just once, but twice. He gets to see Jesus appear, and then he gets to see somebody look at his wounds, touch his wounds, do whatever he wants, begins to see that Jesus is still alive, right? And now this is the 3rd time. But guess what? It's not. It was the third time for the rest of the disciples, minus Thomas. It was the third time for all of the disciples except Thomas. This would have been the second time for Peter. Do you realize that this was actually the fourth time? 1 Corinthians 15, 3-5, the Apostle Paul would write, "For I delivered to you that which first of all I have received, that Christ died for our sins according to the Scriptures, and that he was buried, and that he rose again on the third day according to the Scriptures." Verse 5, "And that he was seen by Cephas, then by the 12. Cephas is Peter. You may miss that in the gospel stories. It is briefly mentioned. Luke 24:34, the road to Emmaus. They have this revelation of who Jesus is as he walks with them 7 miles. They get so excited when he breaks bread with them that they come running back to Jerusalem. And when they get back, they begin to proclaim the good news to the rest of the disciples to encourage them. They say, "The Lord has risen indeed and has appeared to Simon." Simon Peter. You see, we don't know what took place, and it's not mentioned. The words that were spoke, the interaction that might have happened, but we see it twice. That Peter, on the first day before any of the other disciples saw Jesus, Peter had an experience with Jesus. That was his first time. Second time, when life got breathed into him. Third time, when Thomas was there. Unlike everybody else, this is actually his fourth time. And Peter still led the disciples to go fishing rather than go to the mountain. In trials and tribulations, some seek after Jesus, some followers go the other way, some getting stuck in doubt. But I believe that in this very moment, after all of these revelations, these ups and downs with Jesus, that Peter is simply going through the motions because his heart's not in the right place. And Jesus needs to have a one-on-one. If this group's going to go anywhere, Peter, I need you to get your heart right and step up to the plate. He's struggling with feeling worth. I've got to skip ahead somewhere here. I think it's possible that by going fishing and going back to his own ways, he's going back to what he knows best, right? Do you know what you do when you're looking for worth again? Most of the time we go back to what we know best because we know that that brings us value in life. We are willing to go back in order to find our worth or our value, rather than to move forward and find our value and our worth with Jesus. And I think that Peter knew that Jesus, he believed in him, he was alive, he knew that he was God, he knew he had a purpose for his life, but he also understood, you know what? I'm a sinner. I really, really messed up. I even denied Jesus. Years ago, in that transition between college and married life, I remember, do we have time for one more story? I came home from college one weekend, and I was at U of I, and this friend of mine and I, we drove home to be with one of my close friends in his wedding. And at that time, I had given my life to Christ, like a year before, but when I went to college, I kind of cast all that out the window. And so I've told you guys many stories of I was put coincidentally in a hallway with all Christians, and then the Muslims that were next to me and my friend, and us and the Muslims became buddies. I became, I would say anti-Christian, but anti-Christian in the sense I just wanted to torture all the other guys. I took, the number of my hall dorm room number off, and I changed it to 666, and I would do some really dumb things, and totally rebelled against any sort of religion and that sort of thing. And so I remember even went to this friend of mine's wedding, and I was in the wedding, and we were doing something there. And somebody said something to me as the priest wanted us to do something, and I don't remember. So I just flipped him off. I flipped off Jesus on the cross. Yeah, I'm your pastor. I was, it was more out of mocking, or some of you guys are just like in shock, right? Trying to be cool in front of my friends, or like I'm not afraid of this type of thing going on. And so you got to understand, like, I spent 2 more years at U of I after that. And when I left college, like, I wasn't in a place where, like, I really wanted to go to church, if you can imagine. I was somebody who would, I won't even say the shirt that I wore around town. It said, "Shut up, B." And I would flip off pro-lifers as they marched down the street. That was me. And so, remember, I had actually surrendered my heart to Jesus before I went to University of Idaho. If you're all wondering where you should send your kids for college. Anyways, I made obviously some really poor choices. So when I started going back to church, I had this slow revelation of Jesus, of course, going to Chilco. But I would go back to church with Stacy, and I just could never, I struggled at first getting somewhere, going anywhere. And you want to know why? The biggest part of it was the shame that I felt in the things that I did and said toward Jesus. Forget the things that I said to other people. If I saw people that I had known in college, sure, I would apologize. But the biggest deal to me is, could God ever really forgive me? Will I ever really be worthy? Because I'm not worthy. I've probably done things that a lot of the other Christians I see in church haven't done. They just don't know what I did. Like, I'm not really worthy of that. And I remember many, many a times, probably for the first couple of years, I would like invite Jesus into my heart when I'd say my prayers at nighttime before I go, like, Jesus, please save me. And it's not that I didn't believe that Jesus can, you just do that once, so you just say, I surrender to the Lord and you're saved. Like, I get that, but I didn't really know for sure that he could do that for me. So you can imagine, as I'm growing in the Lord and God's doing things in my life, and I'm getting blessed at Dave Smith's with my head down and, a little bit shy and reserved, or not really wanting to be seen or known, or be in sales, whatever, and God's continuing to bless me. It just wasn't that I'm not worthy. But if you understand where I came from those few years, there was this huge guilt that I battled with, like, no, really, God, I'm not worthy. You can imagine that when I decided, after God changing my heart and, helping me to not go into that category of being an alcoholic, and when just another person in my family that's alcoholics, that when I'd mess up and the next morning I'd wake up, you might be able to understand a little bit better that it wasn't just about feeling like I was hungover and my wife was really mad at me, but no, really, I'm not worthy. Why am I even doing this? I should step down from what I'm doing because I'm not worthy. When I'm about to go to my pastor and quit and become, just another person that's sitting in the pews like everybody else because I'm not worthy, and he says, you know what? I'm glad that you came to talk to me. I'm actually going to make the first elder in the church this next couple of weeks, and you're going to be that person. Like, no, but you don't understand, really. I'm the guy that flipped off Jesus on the cross in the Catholic Church and didn't give a rip. I'm the guy that put 666 on the outside of my door and completely rebelled against what God wanted to do in my life. I'm the guy that tortured Christians in Upham Hall at the University of Idaho. I'm the guy that completely shoved everything Christian away from me. God, get away from me. I'm not worthy. Can you imagine? You have these thoughts and expectations, and then Peter says all of this stuff. You don't understand what it meant for him to deny Jesus. He was one of his closest disciples of the three. He was the one that would be the first one to stand up for Jesus. And in that moment, when it all came to a head, he says 3 times, I don't know him. I'm not worthy. And so, yes, he's seen Jesus once and had a talk with him, and we don't know what was said. But he's not worthy. Yes, he was there at the commissioning and the breathing in of the Holy Spirit. And yes, God's doing something inside of the disciples and all of them, and he's preparing them, and Peter's there, and he's going through the motions. He even received that into his life. But I'm not worthy. He's there when he sees Thomas restored from his doubt. Well, I'm not necessarily a doubter, but you know what? I'm not worthy. And now he's there for a 4th time, and he sees the miraculous catch, and I don't know what changed inside of him, but he's the first one to jump out of the boat, forget the fish, forget the income, forget everything we need. He's here again. And Jesus sees that moment that there's something changed inside of him after 4 times. And he says, Peter, we need to have a conversation. And he begins to converse with Peter about the situation. And so I'm going to read through these. Verse 15, so when they had eaten breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of Jonah, he goes back to his old name, the old Peter, do you love me more than these? And he said to him, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. And he said to him, then feed my lambs. He said to him again a second time, Simon, son of Jonah, do you believe me? He said to him, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. He said to him, tend my sheep. He said to him the 3rd time, Simon, son of Jonah, do you love me? Peter was grieved because he had said to him the 3rd time, do you love me? And he said to Jesus back, Lord, see, this is how we know that he knows. Lord, you know all things. He knows who Jesus is. He knows he's the Messiah. He knows that he's God. He knows that he knows all things. But you don't understand. I'm not worthy. And Jesus says to him, feed my sheep. I promise I'm closing, and I'm going to give you 6 quick points. Number 1, what does Jesus do to restore his heart? He confronts the obvious. We can't let sin slide. Truth is truth. Peter did deny him. So what does Jesus do? Jesus, he doesn't necessarily call him out and call him names, degrade him, or make him feel worse about the situation. But he also doesn't shy away from the elephant in the room. Peter knows what he did, and Jesus knows what Peter did. And so he asked Peter 3 times for a reason. What was he doing? He was taking him back to the 3 times that he denied him. I need you to confess your heart to me 3 times. Not confess that you're this horrible, rotten sinner. What I need you to do, because of what you're beating yourself up with, is I need you to confess to me 3 times just the opposite, what I really know is inside of you. The second thing is he brings Peter to a place of examination. I need you to see what I see in you. I need you to see what I see in you. Do you love me? Now, we don't need to get caught up in the different meanings of the Greek words, because I doubt that Jesus was speaking Greek to Peter. But what I want us to see here is that Jesus doesn't ask the question that he doesn't know the answer to, right? He sees something inside of Peter that Peter won't see inside of himself, because he doesn't know the worth that he has to Jesus. And so he even responds, you know all things. But what does Jesus do? He helps Peter see. He helps Peter see that he does have a love for Jesus inside of him, and how great that love is, and that he is worth something. And then thirdly, he reminds Peter of his purpose. So instead of his failure disqualifying him, do you know that, like, when most people mess up, especially if they're a leader in the church, that their failures will disqualify them from doing ministry? We will disqualify ourselves. I'm not worthy of doing that all the time. Well, I know that needs to take place, and I know that somebody should do this over here, and I know that God probably wants this to take place, but I'm not the one to do it, right? Why aren't you the one to do it? Because I'm not worthy to do it. And instead of beating Peter up over an absolute denial, not once, but 3 times, and saying, you know what, you're disqualified, Now that Thomas has come back from doubt, he's going to lead the group, but I want you to just kind of sit back with the rest of them like you have been doing the last few appearances and grow and get some rest, and then you can get back into ministry and maybe you'll do something and be somebody for me one day. That's not what he does. Just the opposite. You messed up. You know what? I still love you, and I need you to know that you still love me. Isn't that amazing? Your spouse can be so mad at you, and you can say, you know what? You still love me. That's what Jesus is saying to him. Peter, you know what? You still love me. Now listen. Get back on the boat. Get back in the boat and get ready to step back out on the water again. 3 times. It wasn't just about love, but 3 times it's about continuing forward in ministry. Like you wanted to fail yourself, but I'm here to tell you, I'm giving you an A+. If you love me, you'll obey my commandments. Now get out there, take those little lambs and feed them. When they become sheep, I want you to tend to them, pastor them, shepherd them, and feed them. I've given you a ministry and a calling on your life, and I'm here to remind you that your purpose today is greater than it was yesterday. Number 4, it's going to cost you. You feel like you're drained, you have nothing left to give, that you've been beat up and that you're worthless. You're so valuable. You're going to give everything you have to fulfill the purpose that I've given to you. In verse 18, most assuredly I say to you, when you were younger, you girded yourself and walked where you wished. You've always done things your way, Peter. But when you're old, you will stretch out your hands, and another will gird you and carry you where you do not wish. This he spoke, signifying by what death he would glorify God. When he had spoken this, he said to him, follow me. It wasn't the first time he said, follow me. He'd said that before to him, but he's saying it again. Now listen, you've been going through the motions, but I need you to follow me. I need you to follow me. Yes, it's going to cost you your life. Yes, you will be crucified. But if you really love me, follow me. Number 5, I think that he gave him the big picture. You know what? Now that we worked through the past, we worked through the struggle, we've worked through the hurt and the value, the big questions, I need you to see the big picture. This isn't about you. This is about me. And the final thing is, Peter, focus. Because what do we do inevitably all the time as believers and followers of Jesus, high or low in life? We're like, what about that person? Immediately, Peter turns around and sees the disciple whom Jesus loved following. That's John, who has also leaned on his breast at the supper. That's John. And he said, Lord, who is the one who betrays you? Peter, seeing him, said to Jesus, but Lord, what about this man? Jesus said to him, if I will that he remain till I come back, what is that to you? Quit worrying about other people in ministry. Quit worrying about what other people are doing in your life, in your business. Quit worrying about whether God's giving them favor or they're struggling in life. Quit worrying about what you see with your eyes in other people's lives. And he says, listen, I've called you. I love you. You have worth. Peter, focus. All of those 6 are not excluded from the first few that I gave you. Don't think that Jesus wasn't wise in trying to reach Peter by first starting with breakfast. He took him to breakfast. Took all of them, but he was really there for Peter. Don't think that everything he did with all of them didn't lead up to these 6 points. That's what God wants to do in our lives. I can stand here and give you this story of Peter, and I hope that you learn something from it. But I can stand here and tell you my struggle, that I'm not worthy throughout all of my life. And I hope you see God still uses me. And if he'll do it for me, and especially Peter, because Peter was great, he'll do it for you.